Thank you very much for joining us. Mr. Vice President, you draw quite a crowd.
What makes you think it's him?
So we're a month ahead. On August 29th, the Cheneys will be celebrating 50 years of marriage. And when we were backstage, Mrs. Cheney said, okay, now if we were to come out here and have a family squabble, that would be your dream. I was like, absolutely. So we'll see how I do with the family squabble. We're going to start here with a question from Margaret Carlson. The great Margaret Carlson always knows the right thing to ask. I'm going to have each of you chime in on this, and then I'm going to plunge in with Mrs. Cheney. The question is, starting with Mrs. Cheney, are you more like the Bushes, who didn't discuss politics at dinner, or more like the Kennedys, who always did?
When the family is alone, Liz and Mary and Lynn and I, we usually end up telling old war stories about campaigns we were involved in. And it's always funny. It always involves train wrecks. The funniest political stories are the train wrecks, and we had a lot of train wrecks along the way.
Ms. Cheney, you're...
Well, no, that's a good description. I think that the level of enthusiasm for political life, varies. When Dick was asked to be vice president, he thought that was a great idea. I was not so sure, give up your job, give up your house and move. We weren't dead broke, excuse me. But Liz, Mary was even more reluctant than I, but Liz, we like to joke, was out in the backyard painting yard signs. So, our level for involvement in politics varies.
Any actual fights?
Oh, sure. But none we're going to talk about today, Mike. No, but I want to say seriously, though, I mean, it's a real tribute to my mom and dad that we did talk politics at the dinner table. And we talked about what was happening in the world, and we talked about what was happening on the news. And, they treated Mary and me very much, like adults who had something worthy to contribute from an early age. And I think it was something that clearly sticks with you.
Ms. Cheney, you're just out with a best-selling book, James Madison, A Life Reconsidered. You worked on it for 5 years. When we were, it was funny.
4 more years.
When I was
4 more years.
I was chatting with the vice president backstage, and I was saying, I bet that never gets old. And he said, keeps me in business.
Right
so, we're just going to give her a few minutes to finish.
Sounds like there's more than two.
Okay. All right, we've had our fun. Backstage. Never gets old.
Never changes.
All right, in James Madison, A Life Reconsidered, we were chatting backstage, and Mrs. Cheney, you said James Madison would have loved gridlock. Explain.
James Madison would actually have thought this was a triumph of the Republic, though, that we have free speech. I'm not sure he would have put up with it for quite this number of minutes, but he thought in general it was a good principle. One of the things I took away from the Madison book was his firm commitment to limited government. He honestly believed that the Constitution gave the Congress certain rights, certain responsibilities, but that we shouldn't go beyond those. And when he saw Alexander Hamilton moving the government in another direction, he founded the first political party. He took the lead in doing that, with the idea that when the government is going in a direction that you don't like, you need to plant your feet firmly and protest. And I think that he didn't see the end of the Republic as passing legislation, but as each of us taking a firm stand and keeping the government on the right track.
Now, you did a little investigative reporting. In this book, you were one of the first scholars to take seriously the idea that James Madison may have had or certainly had epilepsy. How sure are we of that?
Well, what he describes, and I certainly wasn't the first scholar ever to see the manuscript, which still hasn't been published, by the way. It's at Princeton. I wasn't the first to see this manuscript, but I was the first to take it seriously, to talk to neurologists about what he had said in the manuscript, which was that he had suffered throughout his life with sudden attacks resembling the nature of epilepsy and suspending the intellectual functions. And that's quite an amazing thing when you think of all he accomplished. The Constitution, the Bill of Rights, leading the Congress, serving as Secretary of State during the Louisiana Purchase, being the first president to take the nation to war under the Constitution. And yet he had this, he described it as a debility that he didn't let stand in his way. And so that made me admire him more.
So you're just back from enemy territory, the Aspen Ideas Festival, and Walter Isaacson emailed me that out there where you got a fantastic response that you taped a series of full lessons in American history. How did those go?
Oh, it's an interesting idea.
This is for the Khan Academy.
The Khan Academy. It's sort of.
That's right. Just go ahead.
Just keep
They're fine.
going,
Just go ahead.
Mom.
I wondered why the line was so long, and
Touche.
you know, I worry about education. It's long been a concern of mine. And the Khan Academy is kind of like a Wikipedia for learners. It's there, it's online, you can find it on YouTube, and they have people giving lessons in everything from advanced calculus to the Constitution. So I was happy to participate.
All right. And one more on James Madison.
Oh, I can't believe you're devoting all this time. I was afraid I'd be the bump on the log.
Anybody who thinks I never saw Crossfire in the day. My favorite sentence in here, you say, over the course of a long life, Madison learned to learn. When experience proved that his opponent's ideas had merit, he incorporated them into his own. What would James Madison think of Dick Cheney?
Well, let me just finish that sentence. When he saw that his opponent's ideas had merit, he incorporated them into his own, though like any good politician, he didn't advertise he was doing so. Well, James Madison, one of the things, I'm not going to answer your question, but this is a pretty good evasion. One of the things that strikes me is how current Madison is, how current the Constitution is, how current the founders are, though our world has changed so much. There was a recent Supreme Court decision about whether the police should be able to search your cell phone if they stopped you for a violation. Now, think about this. This is something the founders couldn't have imagined. Cars, cell phones, but the decision was made on the basis of the Constitution about whether this amounted to unreasonable search and seizure, words from the Constitution, and the justices decided that it did. So I like to think that even though our world is very different, and in some ways our politics are different, the founders would have a deep and penetrating understanding of what we're about.
Liz Cheney, you've just started, or you go by Cheney. You said that was part of
I'll
your.
answer to either, Mike.
It's part of your
You go.
unilateral doctrine. You had changed the family name. You've just started the Alliance for a Strong America. You and your father co-authored 2 recent pieces, one in the Wall Street Journal, where the headline, and you didn't even need to write the article, the sentence at the top, you said, rarely has a U.S. president been so wrong about so much at the expense of so many. But as you know, the main reaction to that piece was people saying, takes one to know one, including you sitting next to your father, having Megyn Kelly on Fox News, no enemy, just really lighting into y'all.
Well, I guess
To the point that he called her Reagan at one point.
Yeah, well, I guess I'd say a couple of things about that. I don't think you could say that was the main reaction. I mean, I think that depends on if you're talking about the mainstream media, depends
But
on
there's
if you're
no
talking
question
about
that there's plenty of people wondering why you are lecturing us about Iraq.
Well, I think that those folks ought to go back and read the Weekly Standard article and the Wall Street Journal piece. And it's not about lecturing. It's really about saying, why are we where we are today? You know, right now, today, as we sit here, I think that there is complete agreement, frankly, or almost as much as what passes for complete agreement in Washington, that in 2009, when Barack Obama took over, Iraq was stable. Even Barack Obama and Joe Biden said publicly many times that Iraq was in good shape, and that it was the withdrawal of American troops, no stay-behind agreement, which the administration now has tried to blame George Bush and Dick Cheney for, but which we know that's not the case. They didn't want to provide the troops that the commanders asked for. We've walked away from Iraq, and we're now seeing the rise of what is clearly the most dangerous threat to our security since before 9/11, I think. So you've got a situation where we're facing a grave strategic threat to our national security. The president says he's going to follow the same course in Afghanistan that he's followed in Iraq, despite the fact that we've now seen what's happened in Iraq. But I do think it's very important to go back and look at what happened in Iraq and why, and to go back and remember what the situation was in Iraq before the United States and our allied forces liberated the country. And again, there's a sense of, it's almost like the pink ladies and the pink gentlemen, wanting to shout people down. And that's not what this country's supposed to be about. It's not supposed to be about shouting folks down. Everybody has a right to speak. And we all have to go back and look at what the facts were. Now, you can say, should President Obama have withdrawn the forces or not? You could debate that, but now you've got to look at the facts. And the facts on the ground are that because the United States isn't there, because we walked away, because we did so without regard to the facts on the ground, you've now got a terrorist organization which is the richest in the world, which controls more territory than any has before, in a position to be a real strategic threat to this nation. And as we think about where we're going to go from here, you can't be responsible about the future if you don't really understand the past and what happened.
Mr. Vice President, President Bush is rarely seen, almost never heard unless he's talking about a bicycle or unless he's being paid. You are out. You've now become very visible, provoking this sort of criticism. Why are you being so out front?
Well, I think Liz has touched on it, Mike. First of all, the president made a decision that he wasn't going to criticize his successor. That's his call. It's a precedent that was set by his father. I'm not bound by those strictures. And some people don't like that, but I feel very strongly about what's going on over there now, just as I did when we made the decision to go into Iraq in 2003. I believed in it then. I look back on it now. It was absolutely the right thing to do. And what we're faced with today is a problem that is, if anything, bigger than any challenge we faced before 9/11. And our problem then at the time, we'd had 9/11, we'd had 19 guys armed with airline tickets and box cutters come here and kill 3,000 Americans, take down the World Trade Center, blow a big hole in the Pentagon. And the problem in the aftermath of 9/11 was a conviction that there would be a follow-on mass casualty attack. And the next time it would be with guys armed with something far deadlier than airline tickets. And fast forward. Now we're to the point where...
Mr. Vice President, I'm going to stop you there. You made that same comment about box cutters the other day when you were on This Week with Jonathan Karl. You said armed with something much worse than box cutters. What do you fear will be next?
What I fear is something I said to Mike clear back April of 91, before 9/11. I was asked by Nick Lehman in an article, and I think in New York Magazine, what I feared most by way of a strategic threat to the United States, and it was the idea of terrorists armed with weapons of mass destruction, chemicals, biological, or nuclear capability. Now I look at the situation today. We have a rapid spread of terrorism. The RAND institution, RAND, just put out a report a few weeks ago that demonstrates that there's been a 58% increase in the number of al-Qaeda type groups in a 4-year period from 2010 to 2013. It's exploding. It now ranges geographically from West Africa, Mali, all across North Africa, through the Middle East, all the way around to Indonesia. The same study estimates there's been a doubling of the number of so-called Salafi jihadists, equivalent to al-Qaeda. And we look at what's happened today now with respect to the ISIS taking over eastern Syria and a big part of Iraq, establishing a caliphate, trying to. And they are very well off financially. They are attracting thousands of followers from all over the world, flooding into Syria and that part of the world to join in the jihad. And from our perspective, if we look at that I think by itself looks like a serious national threat. But wait a minute, let me finish. The other dimension that I worried about, weapons of mass destruction. Well, if you look now today we are faced with a proliferation of nuclear capability and nuclear technology, especially in that part of the world. And when we went into Iraq, we made sure Saddam wasn't going to develop anymore. You can debate what he had at the time. When we took him down 5 days later, the Muammar Gaddafi surrendered his nuclear materials. And after we got Gaddafi, then we took down A.Q. Khan, the father of the Pakistani program, who had been the supplier of nuclear materials to Libya. We had Syria with a nuclear reactor built courtesy of the North Koreans. We have already had testimony from Khan himself that the Pakistanis sold technology for enriching uranium to the North Koreans. It's a cauldron out there of potential developments with respect to nuclear power. Now add Iran. If Iran gets a nuclear weapon, you can bet your bottom dollar there will be others in the region who get it. So we're creating a situation, partly because of our own determination to get out of the area, of creating a situation we're going to have a hell of a lot of terrorists and a lot of nuclear capability floating around, including in Pakistan, 50 to 100 weapons. Taliban active there, just had an attack on the Karachi airport, killed 34 people. A lot of terrorist activity inside Pakistan proper. And what I worry about very much is you're going to get an entity of some kind, a terrorist organization that controls territory, but also one that has access to or the ability to get their hands on the deadliest weapons on the face of the earth. And our response to it at this point appears to be to dramatically dismantle our military, to withdraw from the area so there's no longer a capacity for the United States to influence events in that part of the globe. I feel very strongly about it. I don't like what I see happening. I think we're setting ourselves up for terrible problems down the road, worse than anything we saw on 9/11.
How much of that cauldron is how much of that cauldron is President Obama's fault?
Well, you can't blame him for the entire problem developing. The problem that I think he's guilty of is that first of all, he's never admitted there's a problem. He loves to run around, only recently may have said a few words about it, loved to run around telling us Al-Qaeda's dead, terrorism's a problem, it's gone. He's dramatically reduced the military. We've got 40 brigades in the United States Army, and today 4 of them are combat ready. We're cutting now, just in the last few days, we're delivering pink slips to officers in the United States Army who are deployed in combat overseas. Now, that is an absolute outrage. It also is a reflection of a policy that's totally unwise. The world's not getting safer, it's getting far more dangerous all the time, and we are rapidly withdrawing from that portion of the world where that danger is going to emerge from. And the policy, I think, is his responsibility. That's not to say that there wouldn't have been developments in Al-Qaeda and the jihadis and so forth anyway. There may well have been, but he has created a situation in which our friends in the region out there are scared to death. They don't think they can trust us, and we prove it to them on a regular basis.
There's been a lot of reporting in the last week or so about administration fears that because of the weapons makers in Syria, that there is a clear and present danger to U.S. air travel. Do we need to have tougher restrictions on people who travel on U.S. airplanes?
We've got pretty tough strictures already, I think, domestically. I think what you have
so
to
you're
worry
not
about.
worried about planes?
Well, I fly on them all the time. Yesterday, the one I was on coming in from Wyoming, I had a good chat with the air marshal on board. He came over and introduced himself. So I'm less concerned about that than I am this notion that we can sort of wish away the problem. That Barack Obama can go out and say that the war is over, just declare it's over with, and therefore he's bringing home the troops, like Afghanistan, and like we've already seen happen in Iraq. I think the very first step in getting a policy in place, a set of policies that will let us deal with this emerging threat, is to recognize there is a threat. And right now, an awful lot of people don't want to hear it. People are, quote, tired of war. We've got folks who are simply don't want to be bothered, and it's been a long time since 9/11. But the bottom line is, I think realistically, if you take a look at studies like the RAND study and the other developments out there, you can't conclude anything but that there is a growing emerging threat to the United States. And in terms of trying to deal with it on a global basis, we're the only ones who can lead that effort. Nobody else can, nobody else will.
What do you think of Secretary Kerry's work on Iraq, Afghanistan, Israel?
Depends on the problem and issue. I think what he did just in the last couple of days and getting a in effect, a recount on the Afghan election. I think that's a plus. My travels out there, Liz and I made a swing through the region just a couple months ago and saw a lot of my old friends that I've known for 25 years, going back to the days of Desert Storm. And Arab and Israeli, it didn't matter who you talked to, they all were wringing their hands at their inability to trust the United States of America. The folks that have traditionally relied upon us, assumed us we were there, that we had their back if there was a problem, for example, or with others in the region, no longer believe that. They're absolutely convinced that this president doesn't understand or chooses not to recognize the nature of the threat that's emerging out there. They all have joined together. If you talk to the Israelis and the Arabs today, they're much closer to one another than either one of them is to the United States. We no longer have the ability to influence events, even among our friends, because they don't trust us.
All right, Mr. Vice President, we're going to do a rapid round here. Whose judgment do you respect more, Bill or Hillary?
Boy, well, I didn't vote for Bill, and I don't expect to vote for Hillary either.
Liz, how would you answer that?
Oh.
You or me?
No, you. Thank you.
Step right up.
Exactly. Taken in its totality, in terms of in all aspects of how one conducts themselves, I'd have to go with Hillary.
Over Bill Clinton? Mm-hmm. Ms. Cheney?
I'm not sure there's a difference.
All right, Mr. Vice President, number 2, Condi Rice or General Colin Powell?
Pardon?
Whose judgment do you trust more, Condi Rice or Colin Powell?
That is an interesting question, Mike. I'd never thought of it in those terms. I have, during the course of my career, had good working relationships with both, and also places where we fundamentally disagreed. And I won't go beyond that.
Rick Perry or Rand Paul?
I don't plan today to endorse any candidates for president in 2000.
Liz, you get to answer that one too.
Well, obviously, Senator Paul leaves something to be desired with respect to national security policy. And so I think that, when you look at sort of, without endorsing anybody, I think that, I've got some big concerns about the extent to which Senator Paul seems to think we can be safe if we just come home and, try to build a fortress America. That's clearly not going to work.
So I should have asked you, why do you trust Hillary more than Bill in totality?
Because I said in all areas of life. I think I'll just leave it there.
All right, last one, Mr. Vice President, Obama or Kerry?
Probably Kerry. And obviously I disagreed in major ways and campaigned hard against John Kerry. He gave us a gift, like I voted for it before I voted against it. So we're not close by any means. But I think he's got a worldview that's more consistent with what I think of as the Republican-Democratic consensus in the post-war period, that the United States has to lead. That's been maintained by both presidents of both parties until now. And I really don't think Obama has in his mind the same worldview that most of our presidents, Republican and Democrat alike, have had for the last 70 years.
And just for fun, Obama or Biden?
Joe's got my airplane. But I'm going to pass on that one.
Can we say Julia Louis-Dreyfus?
Mr. Vice President, Byron York in the Washington Examiner, who's been no opponent over the years, said that with the worsening emergency in Iraq, the architects and advocates of the Iraq policy, and he said, Cheney, as the highest ranking member of the group, bears particular responsibility. Is that fair?
I certainly played a major role in it, and I thought it was exactly the right thing to do at the time, and I still do.
Your former friends have had some very tough things to say I remember when I was covering you, I remember that there was one newspaper that was banned from Air Force Two.
That was temporary.
It's back. But Maureen Dowd, who's very excited that you're back in the news, her headline was actually, "My head's exploding." She says, asked on HuffPost Live whether Cheney was immoral or amoral, Lawrence Wilkerson, the regretful former aide to Colin Powell, replied,
There's a close friend.
former,
That's a joke.
replied, amoral. And he said, immorality is something that can be ferreted out, checked and balanced. Amorality is an altogether different affair, especially when you're exploiting the politics of fear in order to carry out state purposes, which is what Dick Cheney did.
I'm going to answer. Which, one of the things you learn as a historian is that there's an easy way out and there's a tough way out when you're writing a book. What you want is contemporary testimony. You know, you want what people said about James Madison at the time. But what I quickly learned is that you have to evaluate who that person was, what their interests were, and why they had, a side, either for or against him. And I think that's really important for journalists too, Mike. Just to, pick a quote from someone, whoever it might be, and suggest that there is objective truth in it really doesn't work very well. You have to consider that person's past history, that person's total record, and then you begin to understand if the comment or the query is really a good one. Now, if you were asking a question or making a comment that Peter Baker said, I'd pay attention to it, but not General Wilkinson.
Okay.
He's the colonel.
Colonel, oh my God.
Funny that you should mention Peter Baker, who's the author of the best-selling Days of Fire, Bush and Cheney in the White House.
Did you hold my book up?
I did. In fact,
Oh, good.
There's a lot.
these are all Lynne Cheney books. So collect the whole set. Peter Baker, who wrote Days of Fire, and he recently wrote a front-page story in the New York Times with the headline, Cheney's back, blitzing rivals and drawing scorn. Peter's here, and I think he may have a question.
No.
We can hear you. We'll repeat it. Go ahead.
All right, sorry. Well, thank you very much for answering questions today. Appreciate it. Good to see all of you here. Quick questions for the panel. Mr. Vice President, the Speaker of the House is talking about suing the President for, in his view, abusing executive authority. You were always a very strong proponent of executive power when you were in office. I wonder if you could tell us, are there things that you think President Obama has done that you wouldn't have done? Not just policy, not in terms of choices, but in terms of things you think he went beyond what you would define as the limits of what the presidency can do. Ms. Cheney, I wonder, given your book, congratulations on that. It's gotten a lot of great reviews. There's been a lot of talk lately about impeachment. I wonder if you could tell us about what James Madison would have thought about that, what he viewed as impeachment's role in our political system today, when it should be used, when it shouldn't. Ms. Cheney, good to see you too. I wonder if you can tell us, you spent a lot of time as a child riding around in the back seat of a car through Wyoming listening to the Carpenters as somebody or another was running for office. I wonder if you can tell us what lessons you brought from your experience as the person out in front as a candidate and whether you might think about doing that again at some point.
Well, obviously I disagree with a lot of policies. Procedurally, the effort by President Obama to ignore major parts, for example, and alter parts of the Obamacare proposition, where he in effect has just deferred enforcing certain key parts of it. I mean, I think the bill was so bad that I thought it should have been repealed, but at a minimum it should have been amended. There needed to be a substitute that would deal with all of those problems that have been surfaced over the course of the last year or two, and he's just chosen by himself to set certain parts and provisions aside. I do and think he's exceeded the limits of his constitutional authority.
Well, I totally agree. It's also the unwillingness to enforce some laws that he doesn't believe in. And it's not just a one-off thing. There's a whole school of thought now in our law schools. And of course, President Obama was a law professor. that the Constitution doesn't mean what the founders thought it meant. The Constitution means whatever we think it should mean. And indeed, one of President Obama's recent appointees to the D.C. Circuit has written extensively on the power of the president to shape the Constitution by exactly these things, not enforcing laws, changing laws. James Madison, were he here today, would point out to us that the Constitution requires the president to faithfully execute the laws, not to alter them, not to make them, and not to refuse to enforce them.
I would also just add the IRS to what they've mentioned, and what is becoming clearer every day, every time. We see some new email, the latest one I think by Lois Lerner, suggesting that people should not use email to communicate back and forth in terms of what they're doing. There's very little question at this point that there's an attempt to subvert, and the use of the IRS to go after political enemies is a real threat to the Constitution and a threat to our freedoms. In terms of your other question, Peter, look, it is really easy to read the newspapers and become really cynical. And it's really easy for people who are outside of Washington to watch the battles that go on here. And, you sort of throw your hands up and say, my gosh, are they never going to get anything done? But one of the things that I feel very, very blessed about was having been able as a child to see this process and to see the nobility in this nation, and to see the nobility. We live in a republic, and we live in a place where we can make a difference. And frankly, in a situation like the one we're in now, we have an obligation to make a difference and an obligation to speak out. And I think that the experience of not just sort of, hearing, politics is such a dirty business, and it certainly can be, and it can be a mess, but it's to serve a much higher purpose of being a full citizen in our republic. And I feel very blessed that I had that opportunity. I was very proud and honored to have the chance to show my kids some of the same thing. And I'm going to tell one story from the campaign trail, even though my mother's sitting here and she tells me not to tell this story, but we're a close group of friends here today, so I'll share it. So we were at the Wyoming State Fair parade in Douglas, Wyoming.
Oh, no, not
Yeah.
that story.
And we had all of the kids with us, and we decided our youngest two were then 7- and 9-year-old little boys. And so we had a convertible, and the kids had candy that they were going to throw as we rode down the parade route. And we decided we really probably needed to have a briefing with the kids about how this was all going to work. And so we gathered them around. My cousin's little kids were there too. We said, okay, now who knows some of the rules about being in a parade and throwing candy? And my older son raised his hand and he said, don't throw the candy at the head. We said, right, that's important, don't do that. I said, does anybody else have any rules that they think are important to know before we embark on this parade route? And one of my cousin's little girls said, don't throw it too hard at people. Don't throw it too hard. We said, that's really good. Does anybody else want to contribute any rules of behavior for being in a parade and throwing candy, things you need to remember? And my youngest son, who is my father's namesake, raised his hand. I said, okay, Richard, what's your rule? He said, no farting. That's a good one. It's a good life lesson. So, but the truth is, I felt very honored to be in that race, and it's something I feel very strongly about in terms of it's a very important part of our system and our process.
That was collateral damage in that race was your relationship with your sister, Mary, which very publicly played out in a split. You are against gay marriage and were very much so in the campaign. She was for it. By the way, we invited Mary to attend today, and she responded, hi, Mike. Thank you for the email and the invitation. It sounds like a great event. Unfortunately, I'm going to be in Colorado next week for a bunch of meetings, so I won't even be in D.C. for the event. I'm sure I'll get a full rundown from my mom. Best of luck, Mary. Nelson Patterson wrote in and said, asked me to ask you, are you and Mary and Heather simpatico now?
I love Mary very much, and Heather and the kids. And this is an issue we disagree about, and I don't have anything new to add to that.
Okay. Tell me why you are right about this issue. You are against gay marriage, and why your father is wrong. He is for gay marriage.
I'm not going to add anything to the issue.
I'm asking you why.
Yeah, I know, but I'm not
why-
going to talk about it. If you want, we can go back to Fox News. We could talk about that a little bit, Mike.
Okay, go ahead.
No, my point on Fox News, sort of the notion of because Fox News criticized us, that's a message. I keep thinking that I tell you all the time, Fox News is not always right. You just need to, understand that.
Mrs. Cheney, does it bother you that political issues created such a rift in your family? Did things get too political in this family?
You know what? I'd like to go back to Fox News too. The underlying assumption of your question was that if you ask tough questions of a public figure, that must mean you're being critical. Well, I just think it's your job to ask tough questions. It's Megyn Kelly's job to ask tough questions. What a poor thing journalism would be if we didn't ask tough questions of both parties, of all candidates, and anybody who happens to be wondering by.
Last question on this. There's a very public split in your family over this. Do you regret that?
Are you talking to me?
I am. You're the mom. Does this worry you? Do you think things got out of hand?
I think the best thing about being a mom is having terrific children, which I do, and wonderful grandchildren, which I do. And if I were those grandchildren or those children, the last thing I would want is my mother in a public forum commenting on personal differences in the family. So that's it.
Mr. Vice President, what do you think are the chances that Mitt Romney will run in 2016?
Well, I was a big supporter of Mitt's last time around. We had one of the first things I did after I got my heart transplant a couple of years ago was we held a big fundraiser for him in Jackson. I thought he was going to win. Unfortunately, that's not the way things came out. I haven't signed on with anybody, literally, with respect to 2016. I hope we'll have a wide field of candidates out there to choose from. And so I'm going to restrain myself from saying anything that might be viewed as being supportive or opposing any possible candidate.
So we're not going to be supportive or against. We're just going to be very clinical here. I'm sorry, go ahead.
Well, let me add one other thought, though. And you mentioned earlier the Alliance for a Strong America that Liz and I have started. One of my great concerns is that we've gotten to the point where within our own party, we have a sort of an isolationist strain developing. And I want to make certain and do everything I can, and that's the purpose of this alliance that Liz and I have started, is to make certain that these national security questions are front and center in the campaign. That when it's time to debate policy and for candidates to be actively involved in it, we got a lot of domestic concerns, that's legitimate. There are a lot of major differences with the Obama administration on domestic policy. But I want to do everything I can, and we want the organization we've set up to be a part of that, to make certain that the issues of national security, defense, the threats we face in the Middle East today and so forth are front and center in the debate and dialogue going forward between now and this year's election and the election 2 years beyond. So that's partly what we're involved in.
Taking what you just said there, would Rand Paul be dangerous as president?
I said I didn't want to get into endorsing or criticizing any particular candidate. I did express the view that I think isolationism is crazy. Anybody who went through 9/11 who thinks we can retreat behind our oceans and will be safe and secure is I'm sorry, but they're out to lunch. The fact of the matter is we saw on that day worst attack on the United States in Pearl Harbor. When you lose 3,000 people, the World Trade Center, get a big hit on the Pentagon, we would have lost either the Capitol or the White House if it hadn't been for the courage of the passengers on United 93. That's an act of war against the United States. It's committed by 19 guys who got their training in Afghanistan and came over here and used some of our own technology or modern jetliners against us. And there's no way, given today's technology and capabilities and the dangers and threats that exist out there in the world, that we can afford to buy into the notion that if we just stay home and not get involved overseas, not have a presence militarily or from an intelligence standpoint or relationship standpoint with those key parts of the world where the threat's emerging, then we're in big trouble here. And I would have trouble supporting, obviously, an isolationist plank or sentiment within my own party.
You know, I'll just to redirect the conversation for a minute. Madison is part of Republican theory. You know, the founders such as Jefferson and Madison were deeply steeped in what was called Republican theory, how you make a republic succeed. And to both of them, and Madison in particular, the idea of a standing army was a threat to liberty. You know, it might be turned against the people. And so was a Navy. John Adams, when he pushed the idea of building 6 frigates through the Congress, he did so in to Madison's opposition. So Madison didn't, he believed that, you know, a republic was just this wonderful and nice thing. You didn't need armies, you didn't need navies. But as you quoted from the book, he learned to learn. And by the time of the War of 1812, and particularly after the burning of Washington, he understood that no nation can exist in a state of weakness, that weakness invites attack, and that you do need a strong military to turn back even the notion of such an attack. I worry that, you know, we've not learned our history and that we aren't teaching it to our children, that somehow where along the line, young people who are responding to Senator Paul's message, young people who are, you know, like the idea that we would never go to war again, haven't learned the lessons of the past. We need to do a better job of telling them about World War II, for example.
Mr. Vice President, you've been warning about the Rand Paul view for several months now. And what some people may not know here is that you and Senator Paul have a history. As you know, recently on YouTube was posted a speech that Senator Paul gave in 2009, speaking to Republican students at Western Kentucky University. He was talking about the evolution of your views on Iraq. He says, Dick Cheney then goes to work for Halliburton, makes hundreds of millions of dollars, their CEO. Next thing you know, he's back in government, and it's a good idea to go into Iraq. That's a remarkable accusation by now Senator Paul.
I don't remember the accusation from Senator Paul. I do remember the allegation that I was making money because I'd been head of Halliburton and somehow getting financial benefit once I became vice president. That was the charge that Pat Leahy made on the Senate one day, shortly before I suggested what he might do. It was totally fallacious, and I worked for Halliburton. It's a good company, had a good time doing it. But you know, we didn't, quote, go to war in Iraq so Halliburton could make money. That's just a lie.
Mr. Vice President, what do you think of Bob Woodward?
I like Bob. I've had my differences with him from time to time. A couple of times we've crossed swords on specific things, but I haven't read all of his books, but I can remember cooperating with him on one or two of them, and so I think he adds a lot to the journalistic profession.
So
And why do you ask?
In 2 days after your former boss, President Ford, who you'd been his White House chief of staff, 2 days after he died, Bob Woodward on the front page of the Washington Post published an embargoed interview that he'd had with President Ford. He spent 4 hours out in Colorado, and President Ford there said that he was very much opposed to the decision to go into Iraq. Did that give you pause?
No.
Why not?
No, because I disagreed with him.
And has there ever been a time when, let me ask this differently, given what's happening in Iraq now, is there anything that you could have done as vice president that would have foreclosed that or put us in a better place?
Listen, what's happened in Iraq now is a direct result, remembering that with the surge in 07 and 08, that we got Iraq to a good point by the time we left office. And the events, I think, recent events, stem from two primary sources. One, I think Maliki obviously bears a significant part of the burden because of his failure to maintain a coalition government and having purged the military of some of its best leaders who happen to be Sunni. But the other problem has been, frankly, the Obama administration, President Obama, who did not follow through with a stay-behind agreement. And there was never any expectation that we'd go to zero presence in Iraq. We've got, I think, 40 SOFA agreements, status of forces agreements around the world. 40 of them. It's something we've done all over the world. And that needed to be negotiated and implemented, and I don't think Obama ever had any intention of leaving anybody behind, and he was perfectly happy to have the talks break down. He rejected the advice of the military in terms of the numbers of troops that needed to be left behind. But I think what you had to have was a competent military capability with the stay-behind U.S. forces providing things like intelligence and logistics and air support and so forth that were crucial to making it possible for Iraq to maintain its integrity as a territory. We had defeated al-Qaeda in Iraq. They were virtually gone by the time we finished our tour of office, and I think between Maliki's failures and Obama's failures, we've got a huge mess on our hands today.
You're advising the next president. What do they do now?
First thing you do is, one, recognize you got a problem, hell of a threat out there.
I think we're there.
Two, rebuild the United States military. What's being done at the Pentagon today is absolutely outrageous. It's not just a symbol of a bad way to treat people. The cuts that are being made, the cuts that are being imposed are going to restrict the ability of future presidents 10, 15 years down the road to do what needs to be done with some future crisis. So absolutely turn around the whole trend with respect to the United States military. That ought to be our top priority for spending, not food stamps or highways or anything else. Your number one responsibility as president to support and defend the Constitution of the United States. He's the commander-in-chief, and he is absolutely devastating the United States military today. Announce that you're not going to pull all the forces out of Afghanistan. Take the policy he tried to implement in Iraq and wants to implement in Afghanistan, turn that upside down. 4, reaffirm to our friends and allies in the region, Jordanians, the Egyptians, United Emirates, the Israelis and the Saudis, all of our friends out there, that we're with them, that we recognize they're on the front line in the war on terror, and we're going to do everything we can to support them. There's 4. I mean, I'm sure I can come up with some more, but.
When you look at Saudi Arabia, Jordan, which government are you most worried about falling?
I don't think it'd be a benefit for me to make a statement about a particular government. I have known and worked with all of them over the years, and I think they all live in a very dangerous area, an area that's threatened not only by the rise of things like caliphate, if you will, in Iraq and Syria, also threatened by the ongoing efforts by this administration with respect to the Iranian nuclear program. They're all very, very concerned, not just the Israelis, but everybody else that lives in the region, that the current negotiations are a sham. They've been put together basically to put a Band-Aid on the problem until the Obama crew leaves office, and that we're not going to get any meaningful agreement out of Iran that is in fact going to diminish or block their emerging threat. It's a huge problem, and so I think we need a radical change in direction, obviously.
Now, you're the only person in the world who's had the titles White House Chief of Staff, Congressman, Secretary of Defense. As former Secretary of Defense, the other day on Charlie Rose, John McLaughlin, the former CIA director, said that arguably the most dangerous place in the world today is, do you know what he said? South China Sea. Mm-hmm. Do you agree?
Well, it's certainly a dangerous place. I don't know if it's the most dangerous place.
You've talked about, put aside Pakistan, what would you say is the most dangerous place?
Put aside Pakistan. Well, you've got to remember in the Middle East, national boundaries increasingly don't mean that much, especially given the ideology of the rising threat of the groups like ISIS. You've got to start to look at it on a regional basis. And I believe that the most dangerous threat is what is now developing, as I would describe it, in the Middle East, but it slops over into North Africa. But I believe in Pakistan, in developments in Iran, North Korea's prior involvement. You got to remember, what did North Korea do? Well, they provided a nuclear reactor to one of the worst terror sponsoring states in the world, Syria. The Israelis, thank God, took it out in 2007. When we took down Saddam, as I mentioned before, Gaddafi decided to give up his stuff. But that's the part of the world where you'll get the nexus between terrorism on the one hand, caliphate, whatever you want to call it, and on the other hand, somebody with a nuclear weapon. And the whole notion that's governed relationships in that area since the end of World War II, mutually assured destruction and major states being responsible with respect to their acquisition of that technology, that all goes out the door, because then you're dealing with North Korea and Pakistan and Iran and formerly Libya. And that is the place from which I think we will see emerge terrorists armed with a nuclear weapon. And that is a huge problem for us. Anybody thinks we can ignore that, smoking something.
Mr. Vice President, 4 years ago, you believed you were dying. In your book, Heart, since we're holding up books here, Heart, which you wrote with your heart surgeon, Jonathan Reiner, and Liz Cheney, you said, by the beginning of June 2010, I was approaching end-stage heart failure. I found it increasingly difficult to carry out any tasks around the house. I was losing my appetite. And this is very Cheney. I wasn't fearful or anxious about my situation. I had lived a wonderful life, and now it was ending. How do you feel now?
Wrong again. No, I wrote that very seriously. It was a very serious moment, and it's a question that obviously comes up from time to time. I did believe I'd reached the end of the line, and it was, as I said in the book, it was not frightening. I was at peace, and it was more difficult for my family to consider than it was for me to consider. Through the miracles of modern medicine, they worked on me 9 hours one night, 20 units of blood, and installed a pump, a left ventricular assist device that kept my heart working for 20 months, and then I got the transplant thanks to a donor. And so every day when I wake up, I've got a smile on my face, thankful for a day I never thought I'd see again. It really affects your sense of what's important and what isn't. And a lot of the things that we deal with in our daily lives aren't really very important when you lay it over against that kind of experience. What made it possible for me to get through all that not only was the donor in modern medicine, but also my family. And I can't say enough about what Lynn and Liz and Mary did for me to help me through some very, very difficult days. Lynn learned everything there was to learn about being a nurse with respect to those 20
Doctor.
months.
I was a
Cardiologist.
Doctor, cardiologist. There's a glass ceiling there. But that she...
There's one PhD on this stage.
God, thank you. That's right.
And I flunked out as an undergraduate. So, but it was it's just absolutely something you can't go through without the wondrous support that I had in my family. And I'm back doing all those things that I ever wanted to do. I spent a lot of time with a fly rod and shotgun, and now I'm driving a Ford 350 diesel, hauling my 14-year-old granddaughter around to rodeos because she's a barrel racer. And, I have the great joy of years, as I say, that I never expected to see. And but at the same time, these are important points. I don't want by any means to diminish what's happening out there now. And to some extent, I feel a sense of freedom about speaking up and telling people what I really believe. Not that I ever didn't do that, but it's more urgent now somehow because of the problems that I think are developing.
Your transplant was 2 years and some months ago. How much long?
March 24th of 2012.
How long do they say you have? How long is a transplant good for?
They tell me my heart's probably good for 30 more years, but they don't know about the rest of it.
Okay, I like that. All right, we're about to get the hook here. Very quick, rapid round, Mr. Vice President. One sentence. The Bo Bergdahl trade, how dangerous is that? Or what do you think the consequences of that will be?
You gave 5 of the senior leadership back to the Taliban, the same organization that a few weeks ago launched an attack on the Karachi airport and killed 34 people. Terrible, terrible idea.
This is a question from Felix Dodds. What should the Republican Party do about climate change?
Liz?
Nothing. No, look, I think that what's happening now with respect to this president and this EPA and using something like climate change as an excuse to kill the coal industry nationwide, and that's exactly what they're doing. They've been open about it. They even admit that the emissions from coal aren't actually causing any kind of a heating of the planet, but this is an opportunity to go in, and they're killing coal. And anybody, you know, Wyoming is the leading coal-producing state in the nation, but you don't have to be from Wyoming to understand that your electricity is going to be directly affected by that. It is bad policy, it's bad science. We're seeing increasingly that it's bad science. And a much greater threat to us, frankly, is this massive expansion and growth of the bureaucratic state here in Washington. The EPA, the use of things like the Clean Air Act and the Clean Water Act to go directly at people's private property rights in a way that clearly, frankly, is unconstitutional and is a real threat to our freedom.
Mr. Vice President, do you worry about the politics of the Republican Party not doing anything on climate, marriage, immigration?
No, I'm of the school that Lynn mentioned earlier. I don't think it's necessarily a bad year when Congress doesn't do anything.
What about 2016?
Given the role of the government, I'm, I guess, much more in Madison's camp. But the founders, basically, that there need to be limits, and that we've got a great temptation to think we can't solve a problem without federal legislation to solve it, and we end up imposing more and more regulation and red tape. That has a disastrous effect on our economy and is fairly dramatically moving us in the direction of something, you know, closer to socialism than a free enterprise system.
Yeah, there is more than one way to destroy the republic, and you've spent a lot of time talking about the most violent ways, and certainly that needs to be in the foremost parts of our mind. But you also destroy a republic when you do away with the idea of constitutional limitation on government. And when you walk down the path of government isn't an entity of limited rights, government is there to do things for us that our leaders decide we need to have done for us. That is so much opposed to what the founders thought, that it is another way to destroy the republic.
Okay, last question on this, just to look at it the other way then, Mr. President. It's a mathematical certainty that if the Republican Party doesn't increase its base, like it's not going to win the presidency. Without a new message for young people, for gays, for minorities, how does the Republican Party win a national election?
Well, I'm not sure I buy the premise to your question, Mike. I think that's, you made a lot of assumptions there. And I think, you know, I remember a time not long ago when I was part of a ticket and watched George Bush operate in Texas with 44% of the Hispanic vote. I think it's a little premature at this point for you to call out what the results are going to be in 2016.
You're not worried about where the Republican parties are with Hispanics?
I am one of those people who believes that the party ought to be doors wide open for everybody. And I see a lot of folks in the Hispanic community. Those are people that ought to be conservative, religious, and are here in many cases because they work very, very hard to get here because they care about those things and opportunities that America can provide, not just in terms of education, but jobs and opportunity. I think we need to sort of reaffirm our basic fundamental commitment to those principles that Ronald Reagan and others have developed so successfully over the years. And I just don't buy into the premise of your question. I don't think that's necessarily going to be the direction we head in.
I want to say something to that too, Mike, because I think what the Democrats is have a different message. You know, they like to divide the country up. They like to say, oh, you're a woman. Let me talk to you about what I think matters to you. Or you're Hispanic. Let me talk to you about that. Or you're gay. Let me talk to you about that. That's not how Republicans operate. And that's not how we ought to operate. Our message is one about freedom. It's one about fundamentally the rights of individuals in terms of their ability to be free of government interference in their lives. And it's one of opportunity. And it's you know, the idea that you're going to say to a woman, let me talk to you about some women's issues. And you must feel this way about this issue or that way about that issue because you're a woman. As a woman, I find really offensive. And I think that it's very paternalistic, and I think it's not going to serve Democrats well in the long run. I think what we've got to do as a party is be able to say, we believe in opportunity for everybody. And the way that you have opportunity in this country is by limiting the size of the federal government, limiting the scope of the federal government, not what the Democrats are doing, which is to say, hey, the federal government has got a handout for you from cradle to grave. You know, Life of Julia, the website that they put up. That's not America, and that's not going to be successful for us as a party if we try to emulate that.
Okay, just to cross a T on this, Mr. Vice President, you said you believe in a doors wide open party. What does the Republican Party need to do to send that signal to voters in 2016?
Well, I think that we've got to nominate a good candidate. I think I don't have any problem with wide open primary situation. I support Priebus and try to wrap it up by a date certain so that we can get on to the general election. But I'm more optimistic in the good sense of the American people. You have to be in this business as long as I have. But I think that after the performance of the Democratic Party, which I think has been dismal with respect to policy, with respect to we find the state in today, with respect to all those criticisms you can lay out that Barack Obama and his administration have been responsible for, whether it's IRS or the failures overseas, et cetera, Obamacare, they've got a hell of a record to defend, and I'd much rather run a campaign based on our principles than based on their failures.
So it sounds like you think that it's more likely than not that a Republican will be elected president in 2016.
I think we'll take the Senate in 2014, we'll gain seats in the House, and I think we'll win the White House in 2016. Prediction.
How many Senate seats?
Enough.
How many House seats?
Well, I remember when I first became vice president, we had an evenly divided Senate, 50-50. And because I got the tie-breaking vote, we Republicans got to chair all the committees for about 6 months. And then the Democrats bribed one of the Republicans and convinced him to switch, and it turned upside down. But we'll have enough. I think we'll take control of the Senate, and I think it's very important in terms of trying to put a halt to the policies that Obama is pursuing that I think are taking us down a very bad road, both internationally and domestically.
All right, and as we say goodbye here, you were just telling me that you've been out 5 days, I think, on the Snake River?
So far this summer, on the Snake and the Green. Those are trout streams in the west for the animals.
Fly fishing, Jim Vandehei is here. Fly fisherman, what is a fly fishing tip?
A fly fishing tip.
I'll tell you what the fly fishing tip is.
I know. Yeah.
Don't talk.
Yeah, that's part of it.
If you have someone in your boat, they can't talk.
That's a good one. What else?
Make sure you get home when you tell your wife you're going to be there.
And I can't let you go. Earlier, you said that you drive?
What do you mean I drive?
So,
Why do you find that surprising? How do you think I get around?
so you're talking about driving your granddaughter. You actually pull a horse trailer, right?
Yeah,
Set the scene for the crowd here.
First we got Grace a horse. Then if you've got a horse, you got to have a horse trailer. And if you got a horse trailer, you got to have a truck to haul the horse trailer. So I'm the proud owner of a Ford 350 diesel to pull I can't remember the brand name on the trailer, but it's a nice big 3-horse trailer. The thing that worries me is it's a 3-horse trailer, and we started with 1 horse, and I'm going to end up with 2 more horses because we got space for them. So.
I want to thank all of you in live stream land who are watching. I want to thank the Bank of America for making these conversations possible. Thank the Politico event staff for pulling off this amazing event. Thank all of you for coming out in the middle of the day. And thank 3 Cheneys for a fantastic conversation.
Thanks,
Thanks,
Mike.
Mike. Thank you. Thanks, Mike. Thank you.
Thank you, Mike.